Hello. Today I thought I would talk about something which is much neglected, I think, in all the troubles and whatnot that go on in the world, and that is Western values. Like, what has the West ever done for us, and all that sort of thing. So I thought I would mention it because we're much criticised in the West, of course, and we criticise ourselves a lot, of course. And I think it's important to remember what the West has brought to the world, actually, and why so many people want to come here from crappy regimes elsewhere on the planet. So I thought, let's talk about Western values. I don't know if I'll catch them all, but I've written down a list of what I think are the main ones. Rationalism, self-criticism, the disinterested search for the truth, the separation of church and state, the rule of law, and equality before the law, freedom of conscience and expression, human rights, and liberal democracy, for want of a better term. Basically, this is all summed up in the American creed of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But I think originally they said the pursuit of property. But anyway, that's happiness for some. Those are the values that are primary in the West, and we often lose sight of them to our peril. But our institutions are somewhat built around them. They don't enforce them or allow them sort of perfectly at all. But I think the more conscious we can be of these values at all times, and remind people of them when there's problems or when they're being threatened, I think the better it will be for all of us, because it's through the implementation of these values that the West has become so rich and so powerful and such a relatively pleasant place to live compared with the rest of the world. Other systems are being tried. Like in China, they're trying to have capitalism without freedom of expression, and so on. And over here, even, we're trying to have, I don't know what you call it, socialist capitalism with political correctness. Maybe these things won't work as well. I suspect not. But the future is what it is, or what it isn't yet. But let's talk about them. Rationalism is the idea that humans are essentially reasoning beings, and that we can find out the truth about something simply by thinking about it. If you take it at extreme value, if we think logically about things, we can get to the truth of things. In practice, that was the original idea, but in practice this has been found to be not correct, and you need to test your ideas against the real world. So we have empiricism as an added value, as it's called, which is a combination of self-interested or disinterested search for the truth and self-criticism. And the three of these, rationalism, self-criticism, and disinterested search for the truth, come together as science. Almost all of the big inventions of the last 500 years have come from the West. Okay. The Arabs did fine for a little while, but eventually Islam turned against free thought, and they sunk into a dark age, in which they still are. Self-criticism, of course, is something we do almost too much. You could argue in the West we are constantly bringing ourselves down. Politicians are constantly being negative about the West, and protest groups and organisations are constantly saying, oh, we should be more like this and we should be more like that. It can get a bit depressing at times, but because we have freedom of speech, all these views get aired and the stupid ones disappear over time. And when people do have a good idea, sometimes it has an effect. Some bad ideas have effects too. I think political correctness is one of them, because it stifles free speech. You're afraid to say something in case you're going to be labelled a racist or something. But I think these people need to be called on these false accusations and asked to make a proper argument, because it's just an excuse to try to shut people up. Anyway, and that's contrary to freedom of speech, of course. The disinterested search for the truth is a very important one and links with the next value, which is the separation of church and state. Why is it important to separate the church and the state? The reason is that we should be able to base laws on verified facts, not on dogma and superstition. Even if your religion is absolutely true, it should not be interfering in matters of state. That should be done through reason. This is a Western value. I mean, obviously not many politicians are all that reasonable, okay, but overall they are subject to correction. And the system is subject to correction because when they do stupid things, you get a huge fuss in the media, usually, not always, but amongst the general public, often protests, and eventually things get corrected or forgotten about or smoothed over. It's a kind of a self-correcting system, but when you have dogma and superstition in control, that can't happen. Instead, people who protest, because they are by definition wrong, are liable to end up being executed. Which is not very helpful because some of your best brains are then going to be executed. Apart from it just being morally wrong anyway, to be killing people, it's self-destructive to your culture in the long run. You end up in a permanent dark age. The rule of law. This is important because the West, in a sense, gets most of its wealth through business, and you need to be running business on a level playing field, basically, where everybody is playing by the same rules, and that is the rule of law. In corrupt societies, it's much, much harder to make money unless you're also corrupt. And this is why those societies on the whole are poor. The richest societies are the least corrupt, and the most corrupt societies tend to be the poorest. You can't start a business in a corrupt society because it will cost you too much money. You will be robbed of it by richer, corrupt people. In the West, if you come up with a great idea, yes, some gigantic company will come and buy it from you, but at least you've been rewarded for your effort. Okay, that was worth doing. And the idea is out there. Even if this big company suppresses it, the idea is not going to go away, usually. And it will bubble up again. And you've been rewarded, you can go and start some other business and do it again. Okay, that's something. It's not ideal, but it's much better than where, if you don't pay your squeeze to the mafia or the Tong or whoever, you will just be put out of business, full stop. Or if you don't overpay taxes to corrupt governments so you can't expand your business, you will not get anywhere, and the country will not make millions out of future taxes from you because it's not worth your while, and you just can't, because too much is being taken from you at the start. So the rule of law, and it has to be obviously sensible laws, but as managed through reason or rationalism, is vital to the prosperity of the West and any other country. And countries which are struggling with these ideas, even big ones like Russia, stay relatively poorer than they need to be because they just don't get it. Okay. And indeed, another side of the rule of law is that other value, equality before the law. All citizens should be equal before the law, that is, nobody should be above the law. Now we know in practice it's not perfect. I mean, Tony Blair and George Bush arguably started this illegal war against Iraq on false pretenses. They lied before the United Nations, or Colin Powell did. And nobody's prosecuting them for it. They probably should, but it's not going to happen. We know that our societies are not totally perfect. But there's always a danger for them that they will be prosecuted one day if the mood changes. So there's a potential level of control on such people, but it's not very strong. Nevertheless, most people are more or less equal before the law. It's harder if you haven't got money, but it's still not impossible. It's far, far better than in other systems where if you're poor you've got no say whatsoever, and the law just doesn't apply to you. And the law doesn't apply to the state at all. Whereas here, although the law doesn't really apply to the state properly, in that the state is able to do things which would be illegal for you and I, it's still better. And because of freedom of speech, you can make a noise about it and embarrass them. And it's worth doing quite often. Things do sometimes change. Sometimes it's too dangerous. But, sometimes you can, so it's better than if that value was not present at all. Human rights. This links also actually to the separation of church and state. In the West we have human rights like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights at the United Nations, which lots and lots of countries have signed up to but don't implement, so that all people are equal before the law and so on and so forth. You have a right to freedom of expression and so on, which is so not true in most places. And especially in countries where the church is in control of the law. So, for example, you can't change religion in, say, Islamic countries. If you leave Islam, if you become an apostate, as they call it, then the penalty for that is death, officially. Well, that's not freedom of expression or freedom of conscience, is it? And in fact, this freedom of conscience and freedom of expression, rationalism, self-criticism, these values are the ones that make Western universities the best in the world as well. The top universities in the world are Western universities like Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, Yale, Heidelberg, the Sorbonne. These universities are not equalled anywhere else in the world because they don't just want box tickers. The elite universities, when they're looking for students, they're not so interested in the people who just tick all the right boxes. Obviously they want people with money usually, but they also look for people who have done something unique, people who have rattled the cage of society a bit, or who've done something individual and different. They're looking for future leaders, basically, people who are not afraid to get up there and make a noise. And that's, if you've done something like that, you can get into one of these universities whether you've got money or not. They'll pay for you to go. They'll give you a scholarship if necessary. Okay, so, and these universities are the best because they don't want the box tickers. They want people who will argue and question. And these are the fundamental Western values, and these are what you need to be able to do to become a leader in the world. It's very hard in countries that don't support these values. I mean, I'm put in mind of Joshua Wong and Tommy Chung protesting in Hong Kong for freedoms there. I mean, these guys are just students now. I think Joshua Wong organised his first protest when he was about 15, and it got over 100,000 people to attend the rally against people we know are cynical criminals like the Chinese government. Okay, this is very brave and just the sort of person who should be attending a Western university. Of course, he's not allowed to, I'm sure. He's in Hong Kong. But these are the sort of people that they're looking for. Future leaders, future politicians. Too many of them still are just accepted because they're from rich, influential families. But maybe they have something of the right mindset inculcated into them anyway. But it's an important reason why universities in other countries are not as good, because there they teach you to just spout back what you're taught. You must learn the received opinion and just repeat it back. But that's not the way to make progress. Progress is always revolutionary. It's all about overturning what we thought was true and realising that it's actually not true. And if you just accept the current garbage, you're not going to be revolutionary, you're not going to change things. In fact, the world is going to decline gradually. So you need people who are prepared to think for themselves and speak for themselves and are not afraid of giving up their lives actually for ideas. And that's a very small number of people. But if you want to change things, I'm afraid you've just got to get out there and give up on any ideas of comfort for yourself or even survival sometimes. It just doesn't happen otherwise. Or it's unlikely to happen otherwise. And I don't know, these people, I guess, they must at some point make a decision, this is more important than me. And that's what they do. But these are fundamental Western values. It's these Western values of equality before the law and human rights which led to the abolition of slavery, for example. It was Britain originally that abolished slavery and imposed it by force around much of the world. Even the Africans didn't want to give up slavery. It was only possible because African tribes were stealing other people from other African tribes and selling them to the West that we had this big slavery issue in the first place. And I know people say, oh, we should apologise for all this. But it wasn't just our doing, and actually we didn't do it. The people who did it are long dead criminals. And they're nothing to do with us. We don't owe them anything. Okay, these people who are whining about we owe things to the colonies and so on, we don't. That's just another aside. But it's because of our, let's say, improving values over time and our self-criticism that we managed to abolish slavery, and America finally did it after, in a civil war, or after a civil war. And in the 1960s, they managed to get rid of apartheid in America, in the United States. It lingered on in South Africa until the late 20th century. And there's a constant, never-ending improvement, as Tony Robbins might say, in Western society. It's all about what's the latest thing that we can improve, what's wrong here, what's wrong here. And there's a tendency to go too far one way and too far the other way, back and forth until we find the happy medium where things are right. I think political correctness is one such attempt to try to end prejudice, but then you get sort of a counter-prejudice, if you like, where you're over-conscious of race and colour, which is itself racism. It's tough and very hard to deal with unintelligent people who don't get that and just insult rather than argue. But I think the best thing probably is just to say that's not an argument, And the final one, I guess, is liberal democracy. We don't have perfect democracies. In fact, they're very imperfect, but at least they are democracies where if we can manage to keep an informed populace, we can vote, and the choice is not very good between this or that party, but issues do get aired, pressure is put on them, and things do change gradually and slowly for the better, usually. I would favour something more like the Swiss system of a direct democracy, where, yes, okay, you have your representative democracy, but on top of that you have compulsory referendums or referenda. So, like in Switzerland, if somebody can gather, I think it's 100,000 signatures on any petition for a change in the law, then the Parliament has to implement it. They have to do it, or try to do it. I think that's a great idea. I don't know. That's 100,000 signatures is maybe right for the Swiss population. The value might have to change in different countries. I mean, in a country like the United States with 300 million people or more, 100,000 signatures, you could obtain that from sort of hobos on the street, right? Just sign this and I'll give you a cup of tea, right? Okay. So you'd probably have to have bigger numbers, something proportional to the size of the population as a whole, perhaps. But nevertheless, we have some sort of democratic system, and we have civil society as well, where citizens go out and do things that the government are not doing. In most countries in the world, there isn't much civil society. Only in the most advanced Western countries are there strong civil societies, lots of charitable work being done by private individuals. If you go to other countries, Russia, the Middle East, nobody gives a damn about civil society or doing things to try and improve life for their fellow citizens. Not at all. It's everyone out for themselves, and that's it. And their societies are significantly worse as a result. It's Western values of letting people speak for themselves, express themselves, do what they want. It's where you are allowed to do what you like unless it is prohibited. The opposite rule applies in most places. Unless it is allowed, you're not allowed to do it. And so things don't get done. Here, people start doing stuff. If something is wrong, people start trying to change it. Obviously, that's better, but not to authoritarian societies. Okay, well, that's a little summary of Western values as I see them. Interested in your comments, please leave them below, please subscribe, please like, and all that. Okay, bye for now.